part 4 of the series of the rebuttals to VenomFangX's Disproving Evolution. I think it is obvious by now that VenomFangX's absence due to the so-called death threats were a shallow and vindictive excuse for a prolonged absence where he could create these videos in silence. And with this video, the intellectual pollution that is creationalism starts to take on new meaning. It is unfortunate that such insidious pollution can still claim people of talent, referring to, of course, the person who did the voiceovers for him. Anyway, on to this riveting edition.
You see, to evolutionists, evolution's their precious, and if you try to take it away from them, they'll be like, no, not my precious is lost, no!
If you mean the precious being the truth, then I might be able to understand why scientists lament the loss of common sense. You see, as hard as it might be to understand, it is difficult to stand by while creationalist pollution poisons the well of knowledge and progress. Such pollution should be eradicated before it breaks the stony ground of truth.
This is what the evolutionists call the geological column. They claim that the various layers of rock we see around the world built upon each other over millions of years, which is why we find these various layers of rock. However, there are many problems with this. One of the glaring problems are the limestone deposits throughout the various layers. You know, you'd think if the rock was being deposited every couple of millions of years, it would find no reason to deposit limestone, particularly for a few million years, then take a break from its regular diet and move on to clay and other sediments, only to return to limestone for another few million years, and then back to the rest of the sediments. How can this possibly be explained another way?
The geological column requires some understanding on how and why sedimental layers are produced. Limestone, in which VenomFang specifically targets, can be synthesized biochemically or chemically. Limestone itself can be produced solely by the shells of dead marine organisms. I know beaches on the south coast of England just covered with tons of shells. So therefore, in the early Earth, where you have millions of years of shelled creatures dying, you would get limestone deposits. So let's call these limestone deposits the normal production for the sea. Now, young Earth creationalists contend that the shale were altered volcanic ash laid down during the Great Flood. This is wrong, since in 1982 a study indicated that fresh volcanic materials only have a uranium concentration of 6 parts per million, whereas shale contains 60 parts per million. So this discrepancy is far larger and indicative that young Earth creationalist contention of volcanic ash being the source of the shales are incorrect. Explanation of the uranium deposits are the sequestering of uranium through plant matter and then subsequent deposition through river, delta and shallow sea systems. So, deposition through the Great Flood then is highly unlikely, since this would have been a very violent process, messing up all geological layers. It was found also that algae, plant spores and wood debris are the primary organic constituents in this shale, which are products of normal processes, not through great floods. Sandstone is produced by the compaction of sand by the heavier shale. This would imply that the shale would have been deposited rapidly rather than many millions of years. So either this is evidence for the numerous big floods, or that these deposits have come from massive deposition from the land, which is more likely from great thawing from huge ice glaciers from the ice ages and their subsequent deposition by rivers into the sea. Along with the moving continental plates and the increase of elevation of many land masses over the many millions of years, we now have these features coming out of the sea completely and now forms the land. So, in summary, we have a large deposition events coming from ice age melt runoffs coming into the sea being deposited as shale, compacting the sand and other minerals under the sandstone, and normal sea production of cell organisms become the normal for a number of years until the next ice age comes along. As you can now see, these sedimentation characteristics now make sense, if you take into consideration that Earth is billions of years old and not 6,000.
Using this neat little tool, we can see what is called hydraulic sorting in action. There is water in this little case, along with clay and sand and various other materials of different density. As the clay and sand drops down through the water is going to sort them by density into layers.
Hydraulic sorting requires the sea to be under complete stillness with no turbulence, currents, or any other events at all. With a worldwide flood essentially making the entire planet one big ocean, we certainly would not be seeing a nice calm seas, with absolutely low land masses being sufficient to mitigate ocean swells, tidal forces, and other events. Certainly, even if these features were caused by hydraulic sorting, a year would be insufficient to allow billions and billions of tons of sediments to make rock as they did so. Indeed, if the Great Flood was true, we will be seeing a massive layer of conglomerate, far dwarfing any other sedimental layer we see. Clearly, this is not the case. Ergo, again, the flood hypothesis is incorrect and highly unlikely.
It's that we find petrified, fossilized trees sticking up through these so-called stratalayers. So you only have a few explanations. Either you have to believe that these trees stood for millions of years as they were being buried, or that they grew through solid rock, or they were buried rapidly. You have no other choice, and the rapid burial is the only one that fits the evidence and logic. These trees are what are called polystrate fossils.
VenomFangX again falls onto the correct answer, but his interpretation is for the incorrect reason. Let me explain. Let's say a tree falls into a rapidly subsiding coastal plain, and since the rapidly subsiding coastal plain is rapidly subsiding, surprise surprise, we have an extraordinary quantity of sediments being deposited, during which time the normal fossilization process of the tree occurs to the sediments, making the environment around the tree stem to be anaerobic and thus preventing normal decomposition. Study of these polystrata fossils often find these trees are firmly locked in place by their roots, and very often into paleosoils, fossil soils, which require a long period of time without sedimentation to occur in order to form. Clearly, if the Great Flood were to occur, the trees would be not found still being rooted into the soils in which they grew. They would be found willy-nilly, randomly rooted in rocks of any type. Observing petrified forests would not occur. As you can see, this is not one for the evidence of the Great Flood.
This is the Grand Canyon, which I believe is wonderful proof of the worldwide flood.
The Colorado River carries 168 million tons of sediment per year, which represents 0.015 cubic miles per year. The amount of sediment eroded out of the Grand Canyon is 1,000 cubic miles. Even doing this completely simplistic calculation, you would yield taking 66,666.66 years to excavate. Evil, isn't it? For the benefit of the young Earth creationalists, because I don't want to be seen as being biased here, I'm going to favour the numbers on their side, which means 100% of the above numbers have come from 100% of the erosion from the Grand Canyon alone, and 0% from the Wyoming, Utah, and Colorado states. So, let's calculate the age of the Great Flood as being 5,000 years ago. So, we take away 75 cubic miles away from the total of 1,000, and we have 925 cubic miles. But alas, the Earth was formed 7,000 years ago, so let's get some erosion taking that into account as well. So let's take some of that away, and what we have left is 895 cubic miles left to be taken by the Great Flood. So, we would need a worldwide flood to take 895 cubic miles of sediment away from the Grand Canyon in 1 year to get where we are today. The Grand Canyon's 0.015 cubic miles represents 168 million tons, so in that 1 year, 10.024 trillion, that's trillion, tons of sediment, more output from this one river than all the rivers on the planet combined for another years will need to take place. The quantity and speed of water required to hollow out the Grand Canyon in 1 year, or even 100 years for that matter, breaks the laws of physics. This also ignores geological evidence pointing to collapsed cave systems which have been picked up with sonar, which have occurred before even the beginning of the canyon erosion began, thus disproving VenomFang's assertion that the Great Flood was true.